A few moments later, their house blend orders were served. Both Oki and Nagumo reached for their cups to take a sip. Nagumo blew on his hot coffee, while Oki sat silently. As Nagumo took a sip, he reached for the bread knife on the table and suddenly attacked Oki with it. Oki blocked the strike using the teaspoon in his right hand, causing the knife to fly across the room and hit a pillar. A nearby customer, completely unaware, remained oblivious to the knife that had flown just above him. Nagumo then used the table to propel himself and launched a powerful kick straight to Oki's head, sending him flying across the cafe. The customers at a nearby table was stunned as Nagumo stood atop the table. Meanwhile, a staff member served a parfait to another customer, only to be told it wasn't his order. On the other side, Oki was still holding onto his coffee and made a point to not spill it. Kneeling at someone else's table, he took a sip, requesting that he at least be allowed to enjoy his coffee. Nagumo reminded him he had forgotten something. When asked what, Nagumo held up the receipt and said it was the bill. Oki simply replied no thanks and punched Nagumo straight out the window. While airborne, Nagumo asked whether it wasn't usually the boss who picked up the tab. Oki apologized but said he was no longer his boss. In response, Nagumo suggested that whoever survived between the two of them should pay the bill. He opened the case containing his weapon, while Oki pulled out his folded naginata hidden in his coat. Agreeing to the terms, Oki launched an attack. Nagumo managed to evade by using his six-function knife. Oki stabbed his weapon into the ground as he landed and brought up Nagumo's earlier statement regarding the defeat of the new JA now that they were gone. He said he has a warning for him, which made Nagumo pause and think. Oki told him not to get too full of himself. The era of the Almighty Order was over. He had already scouted several new recruits who were exceptionally talented in killing. The scene shifted to another street where two friends were chatting. One of them mentioned how the streets had gotten sketchier lately. His companion agreed, saying it was probably because of the new JAA guys. When they spotted a police officer nearby, one of them approached him and confronted him, asking if it wasn't his job to keep crime under control. He yelled right into the officer's face, saying he's living off their taxes, and told him to do his job. The officer didn't respond. Instead, he suddenly aimed his revolver and fired it straight into the man's mouth. He muttered a sheesh and remarked that he became a cop because he wanted to shoot guns. But under the new JAA, killing had become legal. Being a police officer didn't make sense anymore. He looked down at his license to kill card and wondered why the JAA even scouted him in the first place. Still, as long as he got to shoot, he was fine with it. Off to the side, he heard a baby crying. Someone nearby was complaining about the noise. He approached the woman pushing a stroller and criticized her, saying the kid never stopped wailing and was a real pain. He also mocked her for being overly paranoid about sun protection, pointing out how she was completely covered up and even had an umbrella. Meanwhile, the child continued to cry. He scoffed that the kid looked ugly when crying. The woman apologized and promised to calm the child down. The woman, clearly annoyed beyond reason, pulled out a knife and abruptly decapitated the man who had been complaining nonstop. As his blood spilled, the crying baby suddenly stopped and lit up with joy. Inside the stroller, a license to kill card was visible. The woman beamed, saying the baby really loved blood. The scene shifted to Kyoto Kansai Killing Academy, where the graduation ceremony had just concluded. After the program, friends began saying their farewells. One girl said she would miss her friend once she moved to Tokyo, adding that they had to see each other again sometime. She asked Sheena if both of them had been scouted by the new JAA, which surprised the girl next to her. Still, it wasn't that unexpected. They were, after all, top of the class. Both of them were geniuses. Sheena simply smiled in response to the compliments. As they went their separate ways, she pulled out her license to kill card, thrilled that it had finally arrived. It felt like their time had finally come. Her companion replied that according to their teacher, assassins weren't supposed to become famous. He's not into it, and Tokyo seemed suspicious. He was revealed to be Sheena's brother, and she teased him for being too timid. Still, she assured him that they'd be fine. They'd slay big time in Tokyo and make a name for themselves. As they walked, some order members greeted them. One of them told Torres that they had some lively new kohai. It was Gozu, who admitted he never went to school, so having a kohai was getting him amped. Torres could only comment that he was such a weirdo. Upon arriving in Tokyo, Sheena asked her older brother if he noticed how the place kinda smelled bad. He couldn't believe people actually lived like that and suggested they just go home. Gozu apologized, saying he knew they had just arrived, but they'd have to start working immediately. They were currently short on elite fighters. Sheena, on the other hand, was thrilled and ready for it. Her brother, however, felt the exact opposite. They soon noticed a large man standing by the pedestrian lane. He looked incredibly fierce, especially with the unusual mask he was wearing. Sheena remarked on his size and asked what his deal was. Her brother grew nervous and swallowed hard, thinking to himself that the man looked extremely tough. The masked man didn't respond right away and seemed to be thinking. Gozu noted that they weren't the only ones who had been scouted. Finally, the masked man spoke. He said that if one wanted to quickly rise through the ranks, all they had to do was outperform the other rookies. But Sheena replied that wasn't necessary. She claimed she knew an even faster way. She asked her brother if she was right, which made him sweat nervously as he tried to stop her. Regardless, she pulled out a massive Gatling gun and gleefully opened fire on the masked man without hesitation. People nearby were stunned as the gunfire raged on wildly. But once the smoke cleared, the man was still standing. They were shocked he had survived and wondered if they should call an ambulance. Sheena, equally stunned, remarked that there was something odd about the man. Maybe it was his body or his clothing. But her brother called her a lunatic. Meanwhile, the masked man, who had the word kill written on his forehead, asked what did he ever do to her. He complained that people always treated him like a bad guy. Because of that, he warned her to get ready to die, calling her a little turd. Instead of getting scared, Sheena simply smiled and remarked on how surprisingly high-pitched the man's voice was. However, Gozu immediately electrocuted them both to stop the fight. The two were clearly disoriented from the shock. Sheena's brother ran over to snap her back to her senses. Gozu insisted they save their squabbling for later. Right now, they needed to conserve their energy. The battle had already long begun. According to him, they were chosen because they were killing prodigies who had been quietly smoldering behind the scenes. Along with the masked man and the siblings, the group also included the woman with a baby and the police officer. He said now was the time for them to show what they were truly capable of. The scene then shifted to Granny Mia's clinic, where Sakamoto was still being treated. Shin told the group that Slur and his men were already sweeping through the city to find them. He had also spoken with Seiba, and Natsuki told him that the JCC had its own ICU. It would be safer there than in Tokyo. Since Sakamoto had saved the JCC, they now owed him. This made Mafuyu curious if Shin himself was going to go. They didn't waste any more time and immediately began preparations. With Wutong's help, they would transfer Sakamoto to the JCC. Wutong had arranged their secure transport, and when Lu inspected the inside of the vehicle, she was impressed. It was incredibly spacious and would surely be comfortable for their boss. All of them would be relocating. Sakamoto's daughter asked if they were going to assassin school, to which Shin replied yes. The only downside, he said, was that the food there was terrible, but they'd find a way around that. Meanwhile, Atari remained quietly off to the side. Though clearly embarrassed, she softly said that she would rather stay behind. The others were surprised by her decision, and Shin asked why. She explained that she believed she had run out of luck. Even so, Shin insisted it was dangerous to stay and urged her to come with them. When he bumped into her, she told him not to touch her. No one could predict what kind of bad luck she might attract. Tears welled up in her eyes as she said she couldn't risk everyone dying just because of her. But Shin reached out and held her, joined by everyone else in the room. Atari was startled as they all gathered around her. Aoi, Sakamoto's wife, even gently pinched her cheek and said it would be worse to leave behind a trembling, frightened girl all alone. Boiled grabbed Atari by her top and told her that they weren't the type to rely on luck to survive. Wutong added that luck wasn't scientific and that there was no evidence it even existed. Then young Hannah chimed in, saying that according to the TV horoscope channel, her luck was supposed to be good that day, and she invited her to sit beside her. Moved by everything they said and did, Atari broke into tears and apologized to everyone. And so, once Sakamoto had been loaded into the vehicle, Shin announced that they would now head to the JCC. With that, the group began their journey. As they traveled, Boiled, who was driving, mentioned that it had been quite a while since his last visit to the JCC. Wutong responded that it was located deep within the mountains, about 2 hours away from where they were. When Boiled asked how Sakamoto was doing, Lu replied that his vitals were stable. The vehicle was fully equipped with all the medical tools Sakamoto needed. Surrounding his bed in the back were Kandaka, his wife and daughter, Granny Mia, Heisuke, Atari, and Shin. Hana called out Papa to her unconscious father, who lay quietly on the stretcher. Moments later, Boiled noticed something in the side mirror. Someone was approaching them on a motorcycle. He said that they were being followed. But this didn't come as a surprise. They had expected this. Wutong grew uneasy, while Atari began to feel guilty. She was comforted by Sakamoto's wife and daughter, who embraced her warmly. Shin then instructed Heisuke to handle it. Without hesitation, Heisuke grabbed his rifle, rolled down the window, and took aim. He fired at the pursuer, but the bullet was effortlessly blocked by the man's bare hand, something Heisuke hadn't anticipated. The man on the motorcycle was the masked individual who complained about being treated like the bad guy always. Casually, he tossed the bullet aside and continued closing in on their vehicle. Shin and Kandaka were both stunned and questioned who that freak was. While still riding, the masked man slammed his hand onto the pavement, shattering the concrete. He then hurled chunks of the broken road at their vehicle, striking various parts and startling everyone inside. Shin quickly made a decision. He moved when Heisuke leapt out. Swinging his rifle, Heisuke struck the man's mask, causing him to fall off his motorcycle. Shin shouted after him, preparing to follow and back him up. But Heisuke unexpectedly fired his gun at the vehicle's door, shocking Shin. With his gun aimed at them, it became clear that he was silently communicating something. Though no words were spoken, Shin understood the message. He then ordered Boiled to step on it and speed away. When asked what about Heisuke, Shin simply said to drive faster. As the vehicle took off, the masked man stood silently behind Heisuke and called them idiots for thinking they could escape so easily. Then, Heisuke heard another voice mock him, calling him a poor thing, left behind by his so-called friends. He recognized the voice instantly. Peering at his back, he saw it was Kumanomi, who greeted him with a long time no see and called him a snot-nosed punk. Inside the speeding van, Lu suddenly grabbed Shin and demanded an explanation. Why had he left Heisuke behind? Aoi quickly stepped in, trying to stop her, but Lu couldn't hold back her tears. She said that Shin had seen it too, how the masked man was invulnerable to bullets, and she was terrified Heisuke might die. Shin couldn't answer her at first, but he eventually explained that Heisuke had asked him to trust him. Just like how Sakamoto had placed his trust in Shin, allowing him to do his part, Shin said he would do the same now and trust in Heisuke. He believed he won't lose. Lu fell silent at those words. Shin then recalled a memory of Heisuke, back when he'd once asked if he was okay and told him to take a break. But Heisuke had refused, saying it wasn't time to rest. He wasn't tough enough yet. He needed to become tough so everyone could count on him when it matters. That memory now echoed in Shin's mind. Because of it, he wanted Heisuke not to die there. Meanwhile, on the road, Heisuke now stood alone facing two enemies, Kumanomi and the masked man. Kumanomi greeted him casually, noting how it had been a while since their last meeting in Thailand. Heisuke was stunned to see her there. He recognized her as the magnet lady who had once killed Hyo. While he stood frozen, Kumanomi suddenly leapt past him, saying he was in the way. He turned around, surprised she'd slipped past so easily. As she left, she called the masked man Demon Head and said she would go after Sakamoto instead. He should handle the twerp. On it, the man replied. But Heisuke wasn't about to let her go. He quickly aimed his rifle and fired, declaring that she wasn't going anywhere. He would stop her right there. Kumanomi grew irritated, especially since he still couldn't bring himself to say the word kill, so she mocked him as a coward. She then activated her electromagnetic glove and launched a counterattack. A nearby driver suddenly noticed his steering wheel becoming unusually heavy. Unbeknownst to him, Kumanomi had already taken control of the car with her powers and lifted it into the air. She hurled the vehicle straight toward Heisuke's position. The impact struck him hard, leaving him wounded. Kumanomi taunted that if he really wanted to die, then she'd gladly kill him. But if he's gonna croak now, she felt sorry for the person who had sacrificed his life just to save him. What a waste, she added. From behind the wrecked car, Heisuke fired a bullet at the ground, which ricocheted off the bumper, then the tire, and back to the ground before heading toward Kumanomi. However, she quickly dodged it, and the bullet only grazed her large earring. Gripping his weapon, Heisuke firmly stated that Hyo's life hadn't been wasted. He stepped forward and said he had thought hard about it, how he could ever repay the sacrifice made for him. And from that, he came to a realization. He had to live life to the fullest. Otherwise, everything Hyo had done for him would be meaningless. Kumanomi was visibly annoyed and confused by his words. But Heisuke continued. Not just now, but from that day forward, he promised to enjoy life to the maximum with his friends. He wouldn't let Hyo's sacrifice be for nothing. Kumanomi asked if he even heard what she said, because to her, it sounded like a contradiction. He was about to die, and yet he talked about living life. That made him a moron, she said. At that moment, Heisuke gave a signal that alerted Heisuke, allowing him to dodge an attack from the masked man just in time. Instead of striking Heisuke, the man's powerful hand smashed into the ground, tearing it apart. Heisuke narrowly escaped the blow and thanked Heisuke for the timely assist. According to the masked man, all of them were starting to bore him. He couldn't believe they called themselves pros. Why couldn't they talk less and act more, he asked. Heisuke braced his hand against the ground to steady himself and fired a shot, landing it right on the masked man's chest. But the man didn't even attempt to dodge, it simply hit him. Kumanomi called out for him to evade, but he replied that there was no way. The beauty of pro wrestling, he explained, was taking hits. One must accept every attack from the enemy and then bring them to submission. He then launched into a frog splash and dared them to see if Heisuke could take his hit. Heisuke scrambled away in time to dodge. As he got back on his feet, the masked man asked why he had dodged. Heisuke, confused and unsure, apologized. He no longer knew what to do. He explained that he had fought enemies who could see his bullets and dodge them, but never had he encountered someone who was simply bulletproof. Whether he shot the man's face or body, the opponent wouldn't dodge. He'd just take it all. And when it was the masked man's turn to strike back, a single punch sent Heisuke flying, making him cough up blood. He realized then that his condition was dire. Gripping his weapon tightly, he thought that if this kept up, he really would die. Kumanomi asked if he finally understood the situation. He couldn't defeat them using that antique piece of junk, she said. While airborne and activating her robotic arm, she declared it was time to finish him off. With ease, she severed traffic signs on the side of the road and weaponized all of them. She hurled them at Heisuke, who narrowly dodged by diving to the ground. The signs instead crashed into a truck behind him. As he lay face down on the pavement with a masked man charging straight toward him, Heisuke wondered what he was even doing. Shin had trusted him to handle this. He couldn't let them win. He recalled Hyo and thought that he can't die there. He also thought of Sakamoto, still unconscious, and that drove him to rise once more, rifle in hand. He had to protect his friends. The masked man continued his charge without hesitation. As Heisuke fired at him, the bullets slipped to the wet ground. A sudden explosion tore through the truck that was on the side. The masked man screamed that it was hot, clearly burned by the blast. Kumanomi was stunned that Heisuke had ignited the gasoline. Heisuke declared that no matter what, they were going down. He apologized, but said he couldn't afford to go easy on them. When Heisuke readied his rifle once more, he declared that he would do everything he could to bring them down. In response, Kumanomi told him to get a clue and look at what was happening, calling him a worm. The roaring sound of flames could be heard as they engulfed the masked man, but moments later, the blaze subsided, and he was still standing, seemingly unscathed. He remarked that no one had ever managed to set him on fire. Heisuke was stunned that the flames had no effect at all. It made him wonder what exactly this man was made of to be that durable. He began to question if he was even human. The masked man then claimed it was his turn, warning him not to run or dodge. He launched himself from where he stood and smashed into Heisuke with incredible force. The blow lifted Heisuke off the ground and hurled him far away. Civilians nearby began to panic as they noticed the figure rapidly approaching. Heisuke, who hadn't realized people were there, used his rifle as a brace against the ground to redirect himself and avoid crashing into a woman. He spun midair before crashing hard onto the pavement. The woman called him freaky, while Heisuke groaned in pain from the impact. Kumanomi remarked that he should have used the people as a cushion. If he couldn't be ruthless, then he was already doomed in this fight. The masked man called him a jerk, noting how he had sacrificed his own body to protect others right after being flung through the air. Meanwhile, Kumanomi grew curious about what Heisuke was muttering to himself. Pisuki then approached the fallen Heisuke to speak with him. The masked man couldn't believe that even animals seemed to like this guy. As Heisuke struggled to stand up, he agreed with Pisuki. It was right. They had already won this fight, something that greatly puzzled the masked man. Heisuke admitted that their enemies were incredibly tough and that he was just one man, but he still managed to hold them off. And for him, that counted as a victory. The two enemies grew concerned, realizing they still couldn't get past him. Heisuke insisted that he wouldn't let them catch up to Taro Sakamoto. The masked man grew irritated. He told him to stop talking like he's such a great guy. It only made him look worse in comparison. Back on the highway, inside the speeding van, Shin was silently worrying that Heisuke might die, having been left behind to face the enemy alone. He hoped with all his heart that he would be okay. Lu, too, was visibly restless. Suddenly, she was startled by a commotion from the front seat. She leaned forward to see what was going on. The driver, Boiled, sarcastically remarked that it was just what they needed, a traffic jam. Their van had come to a complete stop as the road ahead became clogged with cars. They soon noticed a police officer conducting inspections at each vehicle, forming a checkpoint. According to Wu-Tong, the JA was now actively searching for Sakamoto. The group grew anxious. If the police checked inside the trailer, they would surely find him. Everyone began thinking about what they could possibly do next. Moments later, an officer knocked on the driver's side window and greeted them with a good afternoon. He informed them that they were currently tracking down a criminal and politely asked for permission to inspect the back of the vehicle. He was even chewing food while speaking to them. Wu-Tong responded by saying they had a patient in critical condition and that it was under the doctor's orders to transport them, so they should be allowed to pass. The officer assured him that the inspection would only take a moment. The officer opened the back of the van to take a look. Lying on the bed was Granny Mia, surrounded by the girls. Hena asked if she was okay, but Granny Mia didn't respond. The officer examined the scene carefully, prompting Shin, who was hidden inside, to silently wish he would just leave. After a few moments, the officer apologized for the disturbance and told them they were all good to go. Just then, a sudden beep echoed from one of the medical devices inside, catching everyone off guard. Aoi immediately grew worried for her husband, and the others all thought it must be Sakamoto's vital signs. But then the unexpected happened. Granny Mia suddenly stood up from the bed. Beneath the blanket, it was revealed that Sakamoto's body, fitted with an oxygen mask, had been hidden there all along. Upon seeing this, the officer swiftly moved to draw his gun and approach. But Shin quickly leapt out to stop him. The officer shouted freeze, having identified them as assassins. Both Shin and Kandako were alarmed. They knew this wasn't an ordinary cop. Shin used his ability to try and halt the officer, but more enemies started intervening. Boiled was stunned when he saw a man standing in front of their van, and realized they were now completely surrounded. Sweat dripped down Shin's face as the horrifying realization hit him. The entire checkpoint was a trap. The officer said he understood why they were caught off guard by the police uniform. Every time he wore it, he said, it fired him up to shoot his gun in the name of justice. Just as he pointed his weapon at Sakamoto, Lu sprang into action. After chugging a beer, she landed a powerful kick that sent the officer flying out the back of the van, much to the shock of everyone around her. Lu immediately jumped out after him, which deeply worried Shin, but she told him to go now. In between hiccups, she entrusted the boss and his family to him. The officer crashed onto the highway, and Lu followed right after, shouting at Shin to leave. Shin refused, but Aoi pulled him back inside the van. The officer then extended his baton, preparing to strike Lu with it. Fortunately, she managed to dodge his blow. The officer remarked that she reeked of alcohol and hoped she wasn't underage. While drinking a can of super beer containing 90% alcohol, Lu asked if she looked young and thanked him. Her eyes then caught sight of several men charging toward their van, with Shin blocking the entrance. Aoi clutched her child tightly while Shin stood ready to face them all. But just then, someone tugged on Shin's jacket, telling him to move aside. It was Granny Mia, who, without breaking a sweat, slashed the throats of all the men lined up at the back of the vehicle. She leapt out of the van and swiftly took down most of them. Shin was utterly shocked by what he had just witnessed. The old woman declared that punks shouldn't stand in the way when a woman is willing to lay down her life. She told them to shut up and just do their jobs. Kendaka protested, insisting that Sakamoto needed her. But she answered that she had already done everything she could for Taro. The rest is up to him. Her role was over. Still, they couldn't believe she intended to fight. Boiled added that they couldn't just leave young Lu and an old woman behind. Wutong suddenly punched him in the face, calling them losers and telling them to stop wasting time. What no one expected was Wutong breaking into tears. Wutong firmly insisted that the young mistress had already chosen her path. They needed to go, or he would kill them himself. Shin and the others were stunned by Wutong's reaction. But given the circumstances, they had no choice but to force themselves to leave the two behind in order to save Sakamoto. They slammed the van doors shut and sped off, with more enemies chasing after them. The officer grew frustrated that their target had gotten away, and now Lu and Granny Mia were blocking his path. As Lu continued chugging her beer, she asked Granny Mia if she could really fight. Lighting a cigarette, Granny Mia replied that she usually just patched people up. A man armed with a knife lunged at her, but Granny Mia effortlessly grabbed his arm and squeezed. The grip was so strong that the man dropped his weapon, which she promptly caught and used to stab him in the chest, leaving him defenseless. She remarked that breaking people was often easier. The officer scoffed and called her an old bag, threatening that he might have to revoke her license. Granny Mia simply responded, "Too bad," revealing that her assassin's license had expired a decade ago. Rolling up her sleeves, she added that she might have forgotten how to operate the brakes. Suddenly, the officer was caught off guard as pain shot through his arm. Granny Mia had struck him with 2 large needles, immobilizing him. She then leapt up and explained she had hit his pressure points. Next, she jabbed another needle into his neck and used it to slash the back of it, drawing blood and knocking him to the ground. Lu watched in awe as Granny Mia landed back on the ground. She complimented her, only to be asked sarcastically if she planned to just keep drinking there. But Granny Mia suddenly tensed. To her surprise, the officer was still standing, laughing, no less. Blood gushed from his neck as he clutched it tightly. Realizing what he had done, Granny Mia noted that he had consciously relaxed his neck muscles to minimize the damage. She admitted she was somewhat relieved. Perhaps the Japanese police weren't entirely hopeless after all. The officer turned to Granny Mia and admitted how hard it was to be a cop, something that puzzled Lu. He explained that officers were given the ability to kill, but were also expected to restrain themselves. And if they did take a life, they needed to ensure it could be justified. It was exhausting, he said. All he really wanted was to follow his instincts. But now, he could kill as much as he wanted. No more annoying rules to hold him back. It felt, he added, like it was his birthday. He then pulled out a long weapon, which Granny Mia immediately recognized as a Susumida, a traditional non-lethal police tool designed to restrain criminals. He lunged at her, but she quickly dodged, causing the weapon to crash into the wall instead. Using her right hand for leverage, Granny Mia flipped off the ground and commented on how excited he seemed about a birthday. Must be fun to feel young again. She counterattacked with a sharp needle hidden in her left hand. The officer hadn't anticipated that, and his eyes widened in alarm. The needle drove into his cheek, piercing through, but he retaliated by clamping his mouth shut, biting down, and snapping it off, shocking Granny Mia. The officer launched another attack with his Susumita, but just in time, Lu rushed in and shoved Granny Mia out of harm's way. Granny Mia asked if she was okay, to which Lu replied that it was probably just all the beer she drank on an empty stomach. Granny Mia called her a silly child. A moment later, the officer successfully ensnared Lu with the Susumida, pinning her down as Granny Mia collapsed beside her. Lu began to panic, knowing the situation was turning dangerous. But Granny Mia quickly ordered her to spit out the alcohol she'd just drunk. She then tossed her lighter in their direction. Understanding the plan, Lu gathered the remaining alcohol in her mouth and exhaled it in a powerful burst toward the flame, igniting a fiery explosion that struck the officer's face and body directly. The flames engulfed him as he flailed and tried to extinguish them. Lu, meanwhile, dropped to her knees, groaning from the discomfort. She muttered how humiliating it was to throw up like that. Granny Mia calmly advised her to get some clam broth. Still burning, the officer growled in fury, declaring that the two of them deserved the death penalty. He fumbled to come up with the charge and settled on something like obstructing a public servant or whatever. While gripping his Susumita, the officer coldly declared that he was sentencing the two of them to death. The killing intent was unmistakable in his eyes. Granny Mia, meanwhile, turned to Lu and asked if she was all right. She told her not to be underestimated. After all, she had a drunken fist mode. She reached into her pocket, only to be shocked upon realizing she was completely out of alcohol. That meant she couldn't use her drunken fist technique. She panicked. How was she supposed to fight like that? Wasting no time, the officer lunged from behind, catching Lu off guard. Thankfully, she noticed just in time and dodged. However, her shoelace got caught in the Susumita, and Lu began to panic. The officer yanked the weapon upward, and Lu was hoisted upside down into the air. From his other hand, the officer pulled out a handgun and aimed it directly at her. Lu had no time to react. She could only curse under her breath. Just then, Granny Mia rushed in and blocked the shot with her leg, taking the bullet to protect her. Lu was horrified and immediately apologized, guilt-ridden that the old woman had gotten hurt because of her. Granny Mia, however, told her not to take her eyes off the man, calling her an idiot. She insisted that Lu run, telling her she couldn't take him down alone. But as the two exchanged words, the officer managed to trap Lu again with the Susumita and flung her violently into the air. Granny Mia cried out her name, watching helplessly as Lu flew across the highway. The officer declared smugly that no criminal had ever escaped his grasp. Lu landed onto a large metal road sign. As she caught her breath, she wondered what she could possibly do in this situation. If she only had some alcohol, she was sure she could take him down with her drunken fist. She debated whether she should run to the nearest service area to get some, but it was way too far. Still up on the sign, pondering her options, she suddenly noticed a car speeding by underneath. Inside the passing car, the passengers were chatting. The driver commented curiously about his companion drinking even though it was still bright out. The woman admitted openly that she was an alcoholic. As she popped open a can of beer, she joked that deep down, she was basically an old man. But just as the car continued moving forward, Lu suddenly snatched the beer can right out of her hand. She beamed and said she'd be taking that, thanking the woman casually. When she got a proper look at what she just stole, though, Lu grimaced in disappointment. The drink was weak. There was no way she'd get drunk on that. She scoffed at the woman's claim of being an alcoholic. Suddenly, a strong force struck the can in her hand, causing Lu to flinch. The beer can was punctured, and its contents splashed everywhere. Behind her, the police officer reappeared and declared that whatever she was planning, it wasn't going to happen, not on his watch. He swore he wouldn't let her drink that, even over his dead body. Fear crept across Lu's face. She had no idea how she could get out of this now. But then, she felt something press into her back, a sharp jab from a thumb. It was Granny Mia, who had struck a pressure point on her. Lu cried out, just barely avoiding the officer's Susumita swipe. Annoyed once again by the old woman's interference, the officer cursed and called her an old hag. Lu, however, said she was glad that she was okay. Granny Mia reminded her to drink whatever was left of the can, so Lu did her best to down the remaining drops. Most of it had already spilled out, but a few tiny drops remained. As the last traces of alcohol touched her lips, Granny Mia explained that the pressure point she struck was meant to rapidly increase the body's alcohol absorption. Lu instantly felt the effect. Her energy changed. Without effort, she stomped on the officer's Susumita, forcing it to slide uselessly to the ground. Her aura had shifted completely. With a confident smirk, she called him a bastard and said he had guts for challenging her. Then she grabbed his weapon and snapped it in two using only her knee. She took one end of the broken staff and drove it straight into the officer's knee. He couldn't dodge in time. The strike landed cleanly and drew blood. The officer was caught completely off guard. The attack had come out of nowhere. Lu followed up with a solid punch straight to the officer's face. In her thoughts, she couldn't help but notice how her strength and speed felt entirely different from before. But she wasn't done yet. She shoved the officer hard in the chest, sending him flying into the path of an oncoming car on the highway. He slammed against the windshield and was flung into the air, spinning out of control. Lu immediately leapt into position, preparing to chase after him. She shouted that she didn't care whether it was Slur or anyone else. She slammed him into the ground and delivered a vicious kick to his neck. The blow hit hard, echoing across the pavement. Now fully intoxicated, Lu declared that she would kill anyone who dared lay a hand on her family. Watching from nearby, Granny Mia couldn't help but comment in awe. So that was the drunken triad mode she had only heard about. She then picked up the officer's gun from the ground and pointed it at him. Meanwhile, the officer groaned and slowly began to push himself up. Lu told him plainly that all she ever wanted was a peaceful life. But if he was going to stand in the way of that, he wouldn't get any mercy from her. Still hiccuping, she gave him one last chance, swear to back off, and she wouldn't kill him. That was her promise. The officer, however, looked puzzled. He admitted he didn't understand. Why would someone fight that hard just for the sake of peace? Lu didn't let him finish. She shoved the gun closer to his head and ordered him to just answer with yes or no. No more words. As the officer glanced down near her feet, he began to speak. In movies and manga, villains always chased after eternal life. But for him, he saw no meaning in that. A life without pain or fear of death was a life without flavor, he said. Then, reaching toward his vest, he used his police badge to reflect the light directly into Lu's eyes. Momentarily blinded, Lu flinched, and in that split second, the officer managed to stand and wrestle the gun from her. He fired, but Lu dodged just in time. Still, she was startled when she noticed something behind her, the sound of chains rattling. It was the officer's handcuffs. In one swift motion, he managed to cuff her wrist. And just like that, he said, the tables had turned. He admitted the thrill of it all. There was nothing quite like it. Now completely immobilized and staring down the barrel of a gun, Lu could only curse. There was no escape. Back with Kuminomi, she calmly remarked that finally, the brat was dead, referring to Heisuke, who now lay motionless and bloody on the ground, having exhausted all his strength trying to hold them off.